This was no minor attack. This was a major strike force. Led by one of the Legion's high generals, Rakish, the demons poured into and around the city, seeking to slaughter indiscriminately. Velen remained calm, as he always did, weathering the blows and assisting the wounded, while those leaders who could most quickly arrive sallied out to stem the oncoming tide. The battle was brutish, but between them they were able to save the citizenry and successfully stop the Legion attack. Which is when Velen realized the purpose of said attack. It wasn't to defeat or destroy the Draenei. It was to destroy the Naru that piloted the Exodar during their exodus from Outland all those years ago, Oros. Oros was directly connected to Zira, and would be able to aid the forces of Azeroth dearly in connecting with the Army of the Light. Oros needed to be saved, but Rakish had already managed to summon a Garothi Annihilator and destroyed Oros utterly. The leaders and Velen fought against Rakish, and something odd happened. Velen, suddenly startled, lost his composure completely, and demanded the leaders stop their assault and spare Rakish. Sadly, Rakish was in the process of detonating his Annihilator, and his salvation would mean their destruction. Velen attacked the Azerothians over this, refusing to allow Rakish to die, but die he did, sparing the Exodar. Velen knelt before the Eridar, cradling him in his arms. Velen is not called the Prophet because it's a fancy title, but because he had unusually clear visions of futures, potential, partial, and actual. Navigating those futures had always been a trying task for the elderly Draenei, but one vision had stuck with him all the long years since his exodus from Argus, a vision that came to him on the day his son was birthed into the world. In this vision he saw himself weeping, holding a dying Eridar in his arms. The man's skin fell pocked and battle-scarred. Velen clung tightly to the child, and the leaders were told to simply go. And as they left, for the first time in a dozen millennia, Velen got angry. No more simply taking it. No more turning, running, or hiding. Pure defiance blossomed hot in his heaving heart, and Velen called forth his greatest engineers and artificers, and got to work. Meanwhile, let us briefly discuss Suramar and the Nightborne. The people of Suramar were those who defied Ashara and her demon masters during the War of the Ancients. They were the ones who used the Pillars of Creation to seal the Temple of Elune. In preparation for the disaster that was the Sundering, Grand Magistrex Ilisand crafted a cordon to contain the central city proper, and all personnel were evacuated within to weather the storm. The plan worked, though it cost. The shield cut these highborn off from all external contact or society in totality. They could lower the shield, of course, but the presumption was that the Legion, which, as always, came within inches of victory during the War of the Ancients, had succeeded, and they were the last bastion of civilization remaining. Thus, all within would not leave its protective embrace for any reason, save exile. This, too, came with cost, as starvation quickly became a problem that needed to be solved. Herein the Highborn vary from their High Elven comrades and their Sunwell. While the Sunwell merely bathed the High Elves in a constant glow of magic, Suramar used the Eye of Aman'Thul, the last pillar of creation, and crafted a locus of ley lines into a shadowy Nightwell, which they then distilled and imbued into the very vintage they drink, Arkwine. In this way, the ley lines' magic would literally provide their nourishment. Over time, this warped and twisted them into their new forms, dubbing themselves the Shal'Dorei. Nightborne. This, then, is why the Nightborne are so devastatingly dependent upon magic, much more so than their contemporaries. Shortly after opening the Fellstorm, Gul'dan approached Ilisand with a very simple deal: serve or die. This was no simple choice, and the Grand Magistrix consulted her advisors. Thalyssra cautioned against trusting the demons. Vandros was all in favor of signing up. Ilisand used her temporal magics in conjunction with the Eye of Aman'Thul, so named for the Titan of Time, to see the best path forwards. In the end, the shield came down, and the Legion occupied the city. Much has changed in the weeks since these events. When the demons first entered, there were little protests, disgruntled mutterings, nothing too severe. These were immediately met by a crackdown on Arkwine, rationing it out to keep the population in general hungry, and to deprive suspected dissidents of nourishment. There was no actual shortage of Arkwine, of course, as the Loyalists drank more than their fill. In the wake of this, open rebellion started, banding together under the symbol of the Dusk Lily. In response thereto, More crackdowns. This is when the exiles really began. If one wondered why so many withered roamed the hills of Ajuna, this is why. And remember, Nightborne need only days to descend. Try not to be surprised, but this only fanned the flames of rebellion even more, allowing the the Nightborne leadership to declare a state of martial law, imprisoning anyone even remotely suspected of dissident leanings and leaving them on display to slowly wither like some sort of sick exhibition. Men, women, children. In all this, first Arcanist Thalyssra, now cast out of court, had managed to weave a repeating pattern into the magical resonance of Suramar itself, sending out a beacon that could be recreated into a message. This was highly advanced magic, and can only be detected, never mind deciphered, by the most schooled of arcane mages. Good thing for her that an entire city of the world's best mages was hovering just next door. Khadgar found the message immediately, and it is here where we catch back up to the present. While some of the Azerothian leaders were still dealing with the aftermath of the Nightmare and the Exodar, those who remained were summoned by Khadgar to receive said message. It was a desperate plea for help, a blind shot in the dark to any and all who would hear it. Thalyssra was skilled, powerful, and adaptable, one of the greatest arcane mages of the age, but she was also alone, wounded, and starving. Even if she stayed ahead of her loyalist pursuers indefinitely, she had, by now, hours at best before she descended. Thankfully, the leaders, with Khadgar's aid, found the first Arcanist and assisted her in escaping into a nearby cave. By this point, she was almost gone, eyes dulled and shaking uncontrollably. But with great fortune, there were mana crystals within, which Thalyssra accepted with trembling hands. The cave was not empty, however, as a nearby banshee watched over a desiccated tree stump. With the ghost's death, the stump rotted away, and the group were free to explore the cavern. This was in fact Shalaran, an old elven hub built to channel multiple ley lines in organized fashion to a singular podium, which by coincidence would also allow those to teleport freely within to any other unlocked nodes. It was hidden, defensible, and brimming with mana, a perfect headquarters for the Dusk Lily Resistance. They needed recruits. First on the list was an Arcanist who'd been banished almost 2 months prior for experimenting on their own withered condition. Oh, don't mistake, these experiments were not cruel tortures or sick curiosities. He was seeking a way to reverse and cure the condition. The leader charged with his return found only his notes, wherein he detailed his work, as well as an encounter with a strange night elf named Ferredin. The notes were brought back to Thalyssra for study, while another of the group found and rescued the chief telemancer, Oculeth, probably the second most knowledgeable and skilled portalmancer in the world, and a third brought in a leyline expert in the form of Valtois. Between the two, the portal network was re-established and the ley lines properly managed and redirected. It was time to make contact in the city itself. As previously stated, there was plenty of passive support for the resistance, but very little active. Azerothians were sent to make contact with the noble Lilith Lunistray, a well-connected and politically affluent figure whose capital would substantially aid the resistance, as well as making contact with the local smugglers underground, who were a little bit more neutral, but still leaning the resistance's way. Meanwhile, using the results of the Arcanist's notes, Thalyssra sent leaders out to investigate a strange artifact he'd stumbled upon, right as it was taken by the Faldurai. The Veilwalker, Ferredin, aided the leaders in recovering the artifact, but the Twisted Elves' bumblings had prompted the seed to begin opening. With no time remaining, the troop quickly spirited it back to Shalaran, where it was planted in the leyline nexus crafted at the center. Fortunately for them, this was by design. Shalaran itself was built to support this unique creation, an Arcan'dor. An Arcan'dor is an old idea, long since rejected. Nature and arcane magic in harmonic balance one with another, manifested into the physical form of an arcane tree. Such a thing was tremendously difficult to cultivate and care for, requiring constant effort to ensure the two halves remain in perfect balance. The elven mages of old had tried to craft Arcan'dor several times. The rotted stump that once sat within Shalaran was typical of their legacy, and the Faldurai were another similar consequence. You see, those elves had been Nightborne exiles that Ferredin took pity upon, and they failed to properly balance their seed. With its detonation, they were warped and twisted into the creatures seen previously. Ferredin did not intend to make the same mistake twice, but since the choice was to let the seed die or make the attempt, why not? With his knowledge druidic, and their arcane, there was hope that this time would fare better. While the tree was tended to, the resistance was starting to take more active affairs. Thieves smuggling arcwine to distribute to the needy, rescue efforts launched to relieve those imprisoned in cages, and vengeance taken for the brutalized and murdered tenders of the vineyards. The Dusk Lily was now in open rebellion. The Loyalists needed now more than ever to elevate those Nightborne who knelt to Elisande into positions of power. A perfect opportunity for Lilith Lunistray to be granted the position. It took some maneuvering, an assassination, some rumor-mongering, and a duel to the death, but Lilith was gifted the post. The Dusk Lily now had someone at the very seat of power in the Nighthold. Almost immediately, Lilith sent invitation to Thalyssra and the Order leaders, inviting them to the Court of Stars Gala. Lilith's contacts enabled the leaders access to the Noble District, although they still had to contend with the many elite guards surrounding the outer walkways, including a patrol captain, Gerdo, who was checking credentials on anyone who enters. That obstacle removed, a small council of demons headed up by one of Thalkeel's old students, Talazay Flamewreath, remained to guard the Gala directly. Divided and conquered, the leaders were left to infiltrate the Gala with Lilith's aid, disguising themselves as a fellow noble and carefully putting together the clues and rumors to suss out the Nathrazim who was hidden amongst the nobility. Or the Slayer could just, cheat. Nathrazim defeated, they took his keys to gain access to Elisande, but sadly the Grand Magistrix was aware of the intrusion and promptly left, leaving one of her personal bodyguards, Advisor Melandris, in her stead. Though Elisande survived, she had lost one of her inner court, and would no doubt retaliate soon. Coincidentally, the Arcan'dor required yet more arcane energy to be pumped in from the Archway, the abandoned tunnels below Suramar. Many things still roamed these catacombs. Ivanir was a Nightfallen on the verge of descending, feverishly studying the lost tomes in hopes of some respite from his plight. Korstalax is an automated construct, designed to repair any anomalies it encounters, to maintain the Nightwell's conduits. Naltira was a spider, glutted from years of arcane runoff, hunting those that dared enter her lair. And of course there was the General Zakal. This one's a bit funny, as the good general was part of Gul'dan's initial ploy. He and his troop had dug beneath the Suramar shield in preparation to invade had Elisande not surrendered when she did. But since she did, Zakal was left, forgotten, waiting for orders that were not coming. At the end was Advisor Vandros. This is the same Vandros who betrayed Ferondus during the War of the Ancients, who sided with Elisande in capitulating to Gul'dan's demands. Vandros had actually taken the initiative with the Resistance, believing that they would tap into the Archway to empower themselves, so he was ready for the leaders. Or so he thought. Despite his temporal magics, the arrogant elf was destroyed, avenging Ajuna. The extra energy flowed into the Arcan'dor. This is the point historically at which the other Arcan'dor failed, the one that resulted in the Fal'Dorei. Thankfully for them, they had access to some of the most experienced and powerful druids in the world, and a renewed Emerald Dream to call upon, restoring the natural magic to the tree and bringing it back into balance with itself. The amount of power this took was risky and dangerous, however, and in the process, the smuggler they'd been working with died from the mana backlash. He insisted upon a last request, written and prepared before his death, that the results of his work would be shared with a specific elf. The leaders honored his request, and found a young woman on the verge of descending, already blind with hunger. Fortunately for her, the Arcan'dor bore fruit. Literally. The beautiful harmonic resonance of both arcane and nature produced a healing bounty unlike anything Azeroth had seen before. And upon partaking, even a Nightfallen would be immediately restored to their full selves, their magical connection erased, their condition permanently cured. This must be emphasized, for this is a sea change. Although the Arcan'dor can only produce so many fruit, so often, this was a permanent cure that all elves could partake in, be they high, blood, night, or born, ending their millennia-long dependency. Given time, this bounty could be shared and spread to all who sought it. It should come as no surprise that as the resistance continued to ramp up, both Tyrande and the Lady Liadrin came forth with their personal retinues, having taken interest in the liberation of Suramar. And none too soon. The demonic leadership of the Nighthold had stopped messing around and began simply slaughtering people in suspected areas. An attack upon the waning crescent served to push many of Elisande's loyal guards to defect, and they brought with them vital information, including strange mass roundups of citizenry. The leaders found and rescued these civilians, as they were bound for soul engines to become fuel for Legion war machines. Tyrande was not overly diplomatic, as was her penchant. Lady Liadrin, however, sympathized with Thalyssra and their Nightborne cousins. Tyrande saw to military affairs as they prepared to besiege the city, as Liadrin focused on relief efforts and support. In the midst of this, the flood of refugees pouring out of the city was growing overwhelming. Remember, the Arcan'dor can only produce a cure so quickly. So Valtois and the leaders reached out to Stelagosa, fixing the ley line that had been damaged by Aelyth to provide sustenance for the time being. And amusingly, both Valtois and Stelagosa ended up rather enjoying each other's company, the two geeking out over ley lines and magical confluences and other such interests. Things accelerated rapidly at this point. For some reason, the Nightwell was pulling power at an even greater rate than before, so violently ripping magic out of ley lines that it could be felt from miles away. Lilith was discovered and imprisoned, leading to the Blood and Night Elven troops falling into a time-stop trap laid by Elisande. Loyalist forces started accepting Fel directly, becoming Felborn. The leaders, Thalyssra and Khadgar, returned to the Archway and maneuvered through the anomalies left unchecked, allowing direct passage into the basement levels of the Nighthold. Khadgar came prepared with Illidan's soul in the light's heart, just in case. Naltira was not the only arcane-glutted creature in the depths, as Scorpyron resided in the catacombs as well, unintentionally barring passage for the group. Further up they found one of the pipelines to the Nightwell, where the chronomatic anomaly had birthed, a consequence of the tremendous power of the time-stop trap that seized their forces above. With the entity erased, the troops were freed, though the leaders still had one more obstacle before breaching the surface: Trilliax. Trilliax was a discarded construct, so degraded in its programming that it now functioned as multiple separate identities trapped within a singular body. Trilliax was deconstructed, leaving the Spellblade Aloriel to bar their path, the most skilled Spellblade in all of Suramar, versed in frost, fire, and arcane equally. Her skill was insufficient, and the gates were opened. Blood Elves, Night Elves, and Nightborne charged into the courtyard to assist in the fighting, while the leaders had some cleaning up to do. While other targets would have been more advantageous, at the High Lord's insistence, they focused first upon Croesus, the very creature that tortured and nearly killed Tyrion Fordring during the Battle for the Broken Shore. Satisfied at the demon's destruction, the troop hunted down the High Botanist Talar, who had deliberately used the Nightwell's energies to partially merge himself with his beloved plants, in many ways resembling the Botani of Draenor. Next on the list was Tichondrius, one-time leader of the Nothrazim who fell during the Third War to Illidan's Stormrage, now reduced to guard dog over Gul'dan, to ensure the crippled orc provided no further treachery. The pathway forward was blocked by one last obstacle: Star Augur Atreus, an incredibly skilled astromancer, driven insane by the knowledge of what lay beyond. In his efforts to convince the leaders of the truth, he showed them the stars themselves, and then the worlds burned by the Legion. And finally, the depthless essence of the void, and those worlds lost to the old gods. In this, he revealed that he agreed with Sargeras' solution to the void. The entirety of reality must burn, lest the void find purchase. His death cut short his lofty ambitions. Beyond lay Grand Magistrix Elisande. Here she revealed her visions, how she tapped into the eye of Amon'Thul to view the futures, and how she foresaw no possible future save that of the legions. It should be mentioned, there are many scattered bits of evidence that her visions were tampered with. Something of a common trend in Azeroth, really. Despite her ability to rewind her defeat several times, it eventually became too much for her, and the broken Nightborne lay slain. An echo of herself left in the Nightwell empowered the leaders who defeated her, that they might stand firm against the most powerful warlock Azeroth had ever seen. Gul'dan waited, patient. Lord of the Shadow Council, summoner of the Fellstorm, darkness incarnate. The bitter orc stood, convinced of the correctness of his choice. The Nightwell thundered out of control. Gul'dan had risen its power to such unseen levels to allow the portal to Argus, such that Sargeras might send a fraction of his soul and claim his host. Gul'dan indulged in combat with the leaders for a time. A mistake, to be sure. Khadgar, ready, interrupted the ritual with the light's heart, and the conflict disrupted the portal. As he knelt, watching his benefactor withdraw from his grasp, Gul'dan was, once again, alone. Illidan, restored and renewed, grabbed the crippled orc and flooded him with raw fel, obliterating him utterly. Suramar was free. The Nightwell was allowed to peacefully dissipate, and the Nightborne would take many years to put the pieces of their lives back together, aided and assisted by their blood elven cousins in the task. But for the immediacy, Thalyssra and her elites swore their aid to the leaders who aided them in turn. and all eyes watched the tomb of Sargeras, waiting upon the broken shore.